I'm also a trustee myself at a charity called Finance Innovation Lab. So I've grappled with this topic of how trustees can centre lived experience from several different angles. As some of you might know, MPC published our guidance on how charities can centre lived experience in December, which we were delighted to create in collaboration with an expert steering group and 10 research partners, which included the 3 organisations that we're going to hear from today. And one of the things that we heard time and again in our research is the important role of leaders in centering lived experience and the need to take a strategic approach, ensuring that it's embedded throughout a charity from governance to day-to-day operations. And as part of that, we know that trustees play a crucial role in creating space for people with lived experience to be a meaningful part of driving impact and bringing about change. However, it isn't always clear where to start, how to do it meaningfully rather than in a tokenistic way, and how to fully support those involved. Our research also made it clear that when it comes to governance and decision-making, lived experience involvement can take many forms, depending on a charity's purpose, activities. In other words, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to involving people with lived experience in governance. So I'm delighted that today we get to hear from 3 different charities, including some trustees, about how they've approached it and what tips they would share for others, whether you're starting off on this journey or whether you're already away along the journey. We've got lots to get through, so I'll be moving us forward at pace and introducing each set in turn. So I'd like to start off with Afra Tulip, who is Vice Chair of Rethink Mental Illness. Afra brings 15 years of experience working at NHS Cancer Services, NSPCC, various roles in support work and youth work. Afra is a carer of family members living with mental illness and has used mental health services for a number of years. She's particularly passionate about using the experiences of people affected by mental illness to develop services. So Afra, I'm going to hand over to you now, and I think we've got a colleague who's sharing slides for you as well. But thank you for coming and sharing your insights with us all today.
Thanks very much, Katie. So I'm sure the slides will launch in a moment. As Katie explained, I'm a trustee for Rethink Mental Illness, and I have severe mental illness. I have chronic treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, and generalised anxiety disorder, as well as some other health conditions. And I think it's really important to explain all that upfront. It's how I would explain it to people within the charity. I think that the more people who we can get talking about severe mental illness, the better, because there's so much stigma that's still around, unfortunately, and there's so much misunderstanding about mental illness and how it can be very debilitating for some and not for others. And I think that actually the best way to understand those experiences in full as a charity is to involve people with lived experience. So next slide, please. So I just want to take a moment to explain who Rethink Mental Illness are, because I know, although we're a national charity, not everybody's heard of us and the work that we do. So it's a charity that was set up originally as the National Schizophrenia Fellowship, and it widened its remit to cover all severe mental illness. Our fundamental aim is to support people to live a good quality life, a better life, where individuals have had control over what matters to them. So we're not setting the parameters for what actually constitutes a better life. That needs to come from the individuals themselves. The charity formed when a group of carers came together looking for support, information, and opportunities for their lived ones with schizophrenia. So it's safe to say that at the creation of the charity, lived experience was at the heart. Lived experience, and in that time, was mostly for those who provided the care and didn't necessarily cover lived experience of people with the condition. Now we've stretched that even further, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I want to say that just because we had the head start of starting with lived experience doesn't mean that it hasn't taken hard work and determination to keep lived experience at the core of what we do. The next slide. Rethink today has lots of different roles and opportunities for people with lived experience to get involved and share their views. Some are more formal, regular commitments. So this could be any of the positions on the board, on the lived advisory boards, and the different boards that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And it can be paid contracts or one-off sessional work. We do offer some things where it is informal and people can get involved and can share improvements that they want to make within the organisation and within the services. And the reason that we don't offer a really strict route in terms of giving lived experience in governance is that people with severe mental illness can fluctuate greatly, and their carers can be very busy providing additional care needs at a moment's notice. But actually, lived experience in governance gives a lot of people an opportunity to not only make a difference in the services they receive, but also it has a huge range of benefits for the individual. We also have lots of informal ways that we use and learn from lived experience. And actually, these are things your various organisations and charities might already be doing fantastic work in. And it's really important to remember that informal isn't worse than formal. It's not better to be constricted and confined by a set of rules. You need to tailor your engagement to the needs of your lived experience members. Obviously, your charities produce support for a huge range of different issues that people face. If I want to see if a service is working within Rethink, then actually it might be more appropriate to have a survey as long as we ensure there's feedback, because otherwise that survey is just data collection and we're not really involving people to the right level. However, if we wanted to look at adding additional roles to a service or looking at how we improve a space, that's when we'd be looking at getting some focus groups together and hopefully having those as paid opportunities. Next slide, please. So, where to start within your own organisation? You've obviously made a really great choice attending the event today, and we're going to hear so many different experiences and top tips from the different speakers. And it's a really great opportunity to see what other areas of the sector are doing, and maybe it'll spark some creativity within your own teams. I always say that actually the first place we have to look when it comes to lived experience in governance, though, is internally. We know at Rethink that we were using language of involvement, co-production, lived experience, without actually having the same definitions for those different roles. So we looked at what those terms meant for us as an organisation, and we decided on some common language to adopt. This made it clear that one team was actually working to the same hymn sheet, as it were, as another. It became really quickly clear that people had the clearest idea about experts by experience being patients, experts by caring experience were carers, and experts by professional training were staff members. But it was also really clear that when we talked about co-production, some people had mixed ideas as to what level of involvement that entailed. It's also important to remember that people could have more than one expert tag. So as explained earlier, I do provide care as well as having a mental illness myself. And arguably, after 15 years, I'm quite well trained in providing expert views. Now, for us as an organisation, there isn't a problem with me having more than one label, but it might be for your charity. I, however, personally see more value in sharing my experiences as someone with a lived experience because it's my most consistent state. It's the thing I do every day. Once you're sure that you can define what you're doing and what you aspire to do, you need to look at the things you are currently doing. It might be with your new definitions that you move some things from data collection to involvement, and you actually realise you've been doing really good co-production from the start. It's important to celebrate those wins and identify what's working well, what could be improved, and really importantly, the different systems that you have in place to support the work you want to do. It might be that you can expand out your work with users without new systems or structures, or it might be that you decide to be safe, legally compliant, and to make sure those roles and opportunities are fulfilling, that new structures would help. A lot will obviously depend on the size of your organisation or charity. Next, please. So I want to make it really clear that lived experience in governance is essential. The benefits are not just for the charity, although you will get better quality projects, better efficiency, you will see things from a different point of view. But actually, you can have those really impactful moments for the individuals involved with sharing their lived experience. They can become more confident and more assertive. It's definitely the case for me. And I think it's really important to recognise that it can be really scary going into a room of people who you see as professionals and having to share your lived experience and whether that be valued. And I often tell a story that's not actually connected to Rethink, where I attended a university to talk about a project I was involved with. And I listened to all the doctors talking before, and I was the only person in that room without a doctorate. So I really felt very nervous and very uncomfortable. But actually, they were discussing a problem and they couldn't see the way forward. And I sheepishly raised my hand and said, "I'm really sorry, I'm not a doctor, but have you tried doing it this way?" And actually, that was the way they went forward with. It was something that they hadn't thought of because they were looking through their blinkered eyes. And I think that that is really important to talk about, and it will become something that I mention a little bit more. Next slide, please. So I really think it's important to focus on as well the fact that involvement isn't just down to one person or one team. You can't just say, we have an involvement team and they take care of all the work. It has to be everyone's responsibility. So in Rethink, we call that our golden thread, and lots of our key performance indicators are tied into involvement and making sure that the involvement we provide are useful opportunities where people feel really valued. And it might be something that you'd like to foster within your own organisation. And it's important to remember that you are improving the experiences for everyone taking part, and that includes your staff who are going to be doing it on a day-to-day. As a large organisation, our structure helps us to ensure that we're amplifying service user voice and experience all the way through, from the groups we run to the services like nursing homes and prison services, all the way up to our campaigning teams, to the parameters that we ultimately measure our success by. And you'll need to find the structure that works best for your organisation. Next slide, please. So this is a brief overview of just the governance element of our organisation. And I think it helps to talk about these different boards and how we're improving things all the time. So for us, lived experience starts right at the beginning, right at the top with the Board of Trustees. We have a representative from each of the regions who have experience of mental illness, either as a carer or as somebody who lives with that condition. We then have co-opted trustees who have the technical skills that we might need, so more information about finance, about fundraising, estate management, IT services. Now, often our co-opted trustees have also got an experience of somebody that they know who has severe mental illness. It's what drives them to us as a charity. It's why they're so passionate about us. But it's really important that we keep that balance and making sure that we have a good mix of roles, because the co-opted trustees' views are just as important as the people with lived experience. And actually, to help ensure that we have that balance, we have two vice chairs of the charity. So one is somebody with lived experience, and one is somebody who comes in from a co-opted role. That works really well for us, and it might be something that you'd want to take forward. One of the things that I learned when I became vice chair is that having conversations with new trustees, whether they were lived experience trustees or co-opted, everyone came in with imposter syndrome. That worry of, should I be at this board? Do I have the opinions that are going to be relevant? Do I have enough skills and knowledge and expertise? And I make a point of talking about that as our chair, because that means that those people, everybody knows their views are going to be seen as equal, and we're having those shared experiences. I just saw a comment asking about co-opted trustees. So our co-opted trustees just mean that it doesn't come from the region. They apply with a CV to the charity. We interview them and decide whether they have the right skills and whether they'll be a good fit for our board. So it's just a slightly different route into our board of trustee instead. Our board is a genuinely welcoming place, and the discussions involving lived experience are handled sensitively. But that's not something that just comes naturally. It's something that you have to work on and you have to develop and be really mindful. A lot of people, when they first come, worry about being dismissed as just a service user. But equally, I have people come to me and say, well, I'm not a service user. And is my view going to be valid from that point of view? I think all boards can work on not being complacent about the harmony within a board and actually making sure that you see it as a team and as a central discussion to get the best result for your charity. The Council of Rethink, or CORE as we call it, is an overarching committee that's relatively new, and I'm very honoured to be its chair. It's used as a communication link between the board and the rest of the charity. It helps us to work out what needs to go and be at the attention of the Board of Trustees from our lived experience point of view. So obviously the Board of Trustees agenda has lots of stuff that has come from the staff directly. There is lots of information about our estates. There's lots of information about the services that we're running. But actually, we get lots of information from the ground about how services are running in different areas, what campaigns people are wanting to hear from, and the issues that people with mental illness are facing. It shares good practice, and we try to create it as a place to search for solutions, because actually sometimes it doesn't need to go as far as the Board of Trustees to have a discussion. People who've come from the regional advisory panels, for instance, when discussing a local issue, might be able to share an idea that helps tackle it. CORE can also help to advise the board on the approaches developed to better involve people through the charity. The Lived Experience Advisory Board, or LEAB, as the name suggests, is a place for discussions around how we involve people with lived experience. It's where we create our involvement charter and work on that. It's where we look at the benefits of volunteering with us and the benefits that people can get for sharing their lived experience. But we also can shape campaigns, look at leaflets, and develop the governance structure. It's a protected space, which makes it more comfortable for some people who have very severe mental illness but want to be involved. You have to apply to be on the Lived Experience Advisory Board. And if we can't find you a place within that board, we'll look for other opportunities to involve you through the charity. The Carers Advisory Board is its sister organisation, as it were. We were being told by our ground root members that actually sometimes we were missing the things that we needed to when it came to carers issues. We had a really good grasp on how different policy changes would affect the people who have the condition, but sometimes we didn't see the full impact that it would have on carers. The discussions at CAB therefore come from a viewpoint that we'd risk losing. So they look often at things like benefits rules and how systems affect us, a carer's charter, and what extra support we need to be providing for the extra strain placed on those caring for others. The regional advisory panels are actually an interim body at the moment, and we're looking at changing this. And that's one of the, I thought it would be good to talk about because it shows the level of lived experience we put into changing a policy and changing a group. So we want to create a regional body that involves staff and it involves users and other decision makers in the area. Right now, our regional advisory panels are really good at helping us see the effects that individual regions face when a decision maker changes something. But what we don't get is much interaction with the services that we run. We don't get much interaction with the services that we refer to, and we don't get much interaction with the decision makers themselves. So the Director of Services and his team had noticed that the aims of RAPS were not quite being achieved in its current place. Conversations were started at board to whether we felt the aims of RAPS were the right aims, because if they weren't, perhaps we needed to change that rather than the panel. Once we were sure that actually we did want those elements to be covered, discussions about how we would change regional advisory panels came to the Council of Rethink, which has representatives from all the organisations below. We looked at any concerns and lessons learned from other transitions, and we have hosted a series of focus groups with supporters who are currently involved in RAPS to look at the questions that we need to be asking in order to shape that organisation. Those questions have been co-produced with lived experience members to make sure that they get the results that staff expect them to. Once we've got a good understanding of how we think our new regional body will work and what it will look like, we've worked on a timeline that everybody feels is useful for how we will have regular updates. So as the changes come into place, the regional advisory panel members are kept up to date. We can tweak and change the product that we're creating, this regional forum, as it comes to fruition. It sounds really complicated, and it is quite complicated. Some people would say it's a bit long-winded, but what we essentially are looking for is a managed transition to a new way of working, but with stakeholder buy-in throughout. These panels changing to forums are not going to work unless the staff feel that it's useful and accessible, the patients and service users feel it's useful and accessible, and the decision makers feel it's worth their time. We think doing it this way means these new regional bodies are more likely to be successful and provide the rewarding experiences that we want to provide on a local level, so that more people can be sharing their lived experience in our entire governance, because there is less limitation on the number of people attending the new regional forums. Final slide, please. So in summary, I think for anybody who's looking at how they have lived experience, you need to already check what you're doing and make sure that you are singing from the same song sheet. Celebrate your successes and focus on your priority areas to improve. And it's okay to look at the aims and to look at the key performance indicators you set and to check that they are actually going to achieve what you want to. Never decide that involvement work is finished, but always strive for more. There'll be new opportunities, new groups of people and communities that you haven't been reaching, and there'll be new technology and ways forward. And yeah, any questions?
Thanks so much, Afra, for such a brilliant and comprehensive overview of all the work that you've been doing at Rethink. And it was really interesting to hear about that journey and all of the considerations that went into it. So I think particularly striking to hear the way that the charity started off by centering lived experience, but actually you weren't complacent and you realised that that needed to evolve over time, through to your current conversations about the panels turning into forums. And thanks also for sharing those tips for other charities looking to get started on this. I'm sure there'll be lots that people will be taking away for their own considerations of their own organisations. We've got time for just a couple of quick questions before we move on to the next speaker. So we had a question from Karen Drury about what kind of KPIs might be useful. So I think you mentioned that you'd got KPIs tied into involvement. So that's one question. And then another question from Cat Glue about steps that organisations could take to start building that welcoming environment that you mentioned. So feel free to take either or both of those as you please.
Yeah, so when it comes to the key performance indicators, they're very much targeted to the service and the stream of our work that it's based on. So it might be, if it was our promotional side, that we'd look at involving X number of service users in the development of a campaign. If it's what comes down to a service, we have key performance indicators to say that we want a certain number of focus groups involved to make sure that the co-production is happening, and we'll have a set list of how that co-production should look. So we need to make sure that people are being recognised for their time and thanked appropriately, that they are being told about the decisions that's been made off the back of their experience, and that they can see the changes that the staff are making all the way through. Because I think the hardest thing as somebody with lived experience is if you sit down with someone, give an hour of your time, and then don't hear again, or don't hear for 3 years, and you're left wondering, was it worth it, and should I have really done it? When it comes, sorry, the second question was about board.
Yeah, sort of creating a welcoming environment. So you talked
Yeah.
about the ongoing work to make it feel genuinely welcoming.
So we have away days every year, and we change between strategic and trust building. So it is really important to have a good facilitator. And when it comes to trust building, it can be things such as being able to have discussions about hypothetical situations in governance that you know would cause a bit of a clash between people, so that you can learn to work out how to respect somebody's buttons and not press them whilst getting that view across. But also it's about things like the quiz that we have in the evenings, where we encourage everybody to get together and to have a little bit of silliness. It's about those conversations that people have over lunch. When our board meetings were over Zoom, we really missed that connection with each other. And actually we realised we got so much good news and understanding of what was happening in the different regions just by talking to each other and seeing what people were up to, seeing what events people were attending. So I think it's a little bit of a work in progress that you need to do. You need to put some time aside to try those activities. And also don't be disheartened if you have a bad facilitator and it doesn't work one time. It's about trial and error and finding what works for your organisation.
Thanks so much. Really helpful tips, and particularly that point about trial and error. We're all sort of learning and evolving. I can see there's a couple more questions in the chat, but I need to move on now to the next set of speakers in terms of time. But I'll hold those for now, and we'll see if we get time to cover them later. But thanks so much, Afra. That was such a brilliant start, and I'm sure there's so much that many different people will be taking away into their different contexts. So our next set of speakers, delighted to welcome Penny Lawrence and Kathy Lebedew from Refugee Action. So Penny is Chair of Refugee Action and brings extensive experience in international development, organisational governance and strategic leadership, including as Deputy Chief Executive of Oxfam GB until 2018. As well as chairing Refugee Action, she is an active member of the Association of Chairs. And Kathy is a Refugee Action trustee and the founder of Jewels in Africa, supporting the education of girls and young mothers in marginalised communities. She is qualified in social entrepreneurship and brings her own experience of the UK asylum system to support her drive for change. So thanks to you both. I'm going to hand over to you. I don't think we've got slides for this bit, but take it away. Very excited to hear what you've got to say about your experiences.
Thanks so much, Katie. Yeah, and Kathy and I are going to do a bit of a double act. So I'm the chair of Refugee Action. It's a national charity providing services, advocacy and campaigns and partnership support to refugees and asylum seekers in places like Manchester and Bolton and Liverpool and across the West Midlands. So it's a national charity. And I think there's lots of similarities actually with the work and the learning from AFRIA, aren't there, Kathy? In that we've got lots of different ways of people with lived experience. In fact, in our language, we actually have renamed that experts by experience at the request of refugees and asylum seekers with lived experience and clients of ours. So our experts by experience, or EBEs, actually have a whole range of different ways of getting involved in the campaigns. There's a sort of a dedicated campaigns group, and that's been partnership groups and so on, and that's been around for some time. But we recognised as a board that we didn't have that lived experience sitting round the governance table, and so we invited people from our experts by experience groups to apply for roles as trustees. And it is still an ongoing journey, but that was about 5 years ago. And the very poor person who was the first EBE, who got all those questions about, well, how does this look from an EBE perspective, and expected to represent all asylum seekers and refugees in the country. We moved on from that, poor MAF, to now being a majority EBE board. So 6 out of our 11 trustees are experts by experience. And we've learned, and I've learned so much from that, to recognise that experts by experience not only have a perspective that is of value, but also have a whole host of skills that they can bring. They might not have the same qualifications perhaps, or qualifications that aren't recognised in the UK, but that doesn't mean to say they don't have fantastic skills and expertise to bring. And so we've adjusted our skills and perspectives audit, for example, to capture some of that and to value it. And then when we've advertised for trustees, we have said that we are particularly keen to appoint experts by experience, and we have gone round and tapped people on the shoulder who have expertise by experience to encourage them to apply. So that whole combination means that we've tackled step 1, which was really the representation issue. But representation on its own clearly isn't enough. You've got to go for making sure that those experts by experience have a voice and have influence on the board. And that, I think, requires 2 things. One is about taking an approach of inclusion, and the second is about actually shifting power, changing the processes at the board to make sure that you shift the power towards the people with lived, or those experts by experience. So on the inclusion, I think a bit like Afra said, you've got to recognise that a lot of our experts by experience are extremely vulnerable people, and that they have particular needs around, maybe they don't have the right to work, maybe they actually, it's no good saying we'll reimburse your expenses if you don't have the money to put it up in the first place to buy the train ticket. So it's required us to really adapt our processes from paying for tickets up front through to buddying systems for new trustees, to special training sessions on finance, because not every trustee has to know about finance, but you kind of are pretty excluded if you don't understand about finance. So we've had to adapt a lot of our processes and procedures to make sure that we tackle the inclusion aspects. One of the prime things is, I think, how we make sure at board meetings we use a Nancy Klein technique of rounds. So an item comes up for discussion, and what trustees now expect, I hope, but Kathy can tell me if she's expecting it, is that we will do a round. So everybody is expected to make a contribution on all issues, but you can say pass. So if, for example, somebody has said something that you wanted to contribute, then you just pass. If, for example, you have nothing to add to the discussion, you can pass. But by actually doing that round and saying, you know, what would you like to say? What do you think of this? Are you happy with this proposal? What is your view? And going around everybody, it makes sure that everybody feels they can be included if they want to be, and gives everybody a voice. And shifting power is also making sure that you actually adopt processes that prioritize the voice of the experts by experience where it is most appropriate. So in a discussion on reserves, for example, we would always prioritize the voice of the treasurer. When it comes to strategy, what we did last year was we said, right, the first thing we're going to do is really listen to the experience of refugees and asylum seekers, those in the room, those outside the room. And that allowed us to take a really brave decision that we weren't going to support the current asylum seeker system. We were going to actually advocate for a complete sea change, and we were going to stand up for the rights of asylum seekers and refugees in a very different way. So it allowed us, I think, to be bolder and braver in that way. But we've also had some real challenges along the way, and some difficulties. And I think, Kathy, you're going to talk about some of the difficult issues we've had to talk about, as well as your experience of being an EBE. Over to you.
Thanks, Penny. Well, I think there are a lot of similarities, like what Penny has highlighted in what Afra has shared, as well as the model that we have at Refugee Action. However, we have been evolving over the years, and the challenges, they will always be there. They'll always be numerous, and some of which Penny has already highlighted. For example, you know, when you have experts by experience who do not have maybe an in-depth understanding or experience of governance in the UK, because you have experience elsewhere where you're coming from. And maybe just to say, Refugee Action, obviously we are, you know, dealing with refugees and asylum seekers. So sometimes you have people who or candidates who are applying who do not have experience, you know, with the governance in the UK context. So try and help people understand where we are and try to provide the trainings like what Refugee Action has been doing, plus the budding system. And myself particularly, I had challenges with understanding the finances. So the documents would come and there would be plenty of them. And the finances was a huge thing for me that I was trying to get to grips with. So because the board was welcoming, and I'm happy that Afra has spoken about, you know, creating a welcoming environment. The board was welcoming, and I'd spoken to Penny about it even before we went to our first meeting to say, well, I might have an issue with this part of things. And she said, well, how about if you are there, we can, number one, she was going to ask the person who is in charge of doing the documents to make sure that the language is simplified so that we can understand it. That's me, and maybe and other few people who are not understanding it. And secondly, to just be comfortable to ask questions. So at some point, I was the one who would, you know, be like, oh, excuse me, I didn't understand. What do you mean by that? What does that term mean? And I'm very happy that the board was, you know, it was friendly enough to accommodate questions when they would come. And some questions might be silly, but at the end of the day, they are not, because it's in asking the questions that you begin to understand some of, you know, the ways of doing things, understanding the systems, and just understanding how finances work, particularly at a big organization like Refugee Action. So that was one thing. And also being involved, for example, we created a task and finish groups. So we actually have one on finances. So, and I am part of it. And I realized that by being a part of, you know, those conversations, or, you know, when the accountant is meeting with another person from the board and discussing finances, if I join the conversations, even if I'm just listening, I'm able to learn and to adjust and to know the right questions to ask, and to know, you know, where to focus on when we're looking at our papers every time we're having a meeting or pre-meetings. So that's one. The other challenge that we had when I joined the board, so I was actually part of the steering group of Refugee Action. So, and basically what we were doing as the steering group was we were coming from different parts of the organizations, the different networks that are in Refugee Action. So I was coming from RAS Voice, which is Refugees and Asylum Seekers, and our main purpose was to be involved in the campaigns team of Refugee Action. So when I was there with all the other people who were a part of the different networks, we were able to contribute to the main strategic goals of the organization, their annual strategic goals. So we would come up with recommendations and say, well, you are talking about shifting power, but how come on your senior leadership team, we are not seeing representation, we're not seeing people with lived experience or enough people with lived experience? How come on the board, we are not seeing, adequate representation? How come in these areas, the managers, we were asking questions? And so when we would come to the board every year, or maybe twice in the year, we would come with the questions and give recommendations to say, well, we think in this area, you could actually do better, or we think you need to quantify and make sure that when you say shifting power, what are you aiming for? What are your goals as an organization? So that we are able to measure as well and say, well, shifting power has been created, has been done. So now, the problem that we would have with that system was we would realize that it was more formal because we're just coming to one particular part of the meetings when the board is having their meeting, where we come and just feed in, do the recommendations, and after that we go back and wait for decisions to be made or wait for feedback. So what we have decided to do now, and that's part of us also trying to be more welcoming, more inclusive, and more meaningful when we are talking about shifting power and representation, to make sure that they come and have an experience with us when we're having an away day, which I'm sure AFRAS, they also do at their own organization. So we go there and they come, they become a part of it. And in that way, they're not just feeding into with recommendations, but they're also learning about the organization and learning about the challenges that we are facing. Because sometimes what happens is, in my experience as someone who would come from the steering group and come to board meetings, you do not understand, for example, the challenges that the organization have. Or when we are asking the organization to say, well, we want, the IT to do this, we want this to be done. We do not understand what that entails. We don't understand if the organization has got enough money to do that in terms of our budget and stuff. So it's important that we evolved, and we started doing it recently, where we're inviting the steering group to be a part of our away days, which is what we have done. The other issues that we've had is we had some challenges last year with our Homes of Ukraine, Homes of Ukraine, that we were having challenges, and I'm sure that most people are aware of it, as well as the restructuring process that we've had in the organization. So we've had, people who come to us and, they're not happy with what's happening. And we as a board, we had the responsibility to make sure that the staff members at Refugee Action, they know that we are listening, to the queries that they have. We're listening to, the suggestions that they are making, and we are making sure that there are mental and well-being services that they are actually sufficient and relevant to what was going on in the organization. So there was a lot of going back and forth and us trying to see, how can we do this? How can we better achieve this? And it was important for us, people with lived experience, to be on the board at that time dealing with those issues, because most people who were being affected were obviously people who are refugees, people who are in the asylum system. And so for us to be there and be able to contribute to that was very important to the organization. However, it was also overwhelming. So there was that trying to balance it and, talking to Penny, who is the chair, and saying, well, how are we dealing with this? Or this is overwhelming, and trying to look for support from her as well as the chief exec. which we were able to do, I think, and trying to see that everyone is being supported, not only just the staff who are being affected, as well as our clients, but the board members as well, because it was an overwhelming situation that most of us had not been through. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Also, yeah, the other challenge as far as representation is concerned, I've spoken about trying to have representation on the senior leadership team. What we are trying to get to now is to make sure that as our chair, the next chair for refugee action on our board would be someone with lived experience. We love Penny so much, and she's been amazing with us. But we are also aiming, and Penny is always advocating for this, that her aim and the aim of the organization is at large is that we will have the next chair someone with lived experience. And not only that, hopefully the next CEO of Refugee Action as well would be someone with lived experience. So that's where we're at. And we're trying to put measures in place that as we move forward, there are people who are, who are being either empowered to do so, or trying to make sure that people will know when those adverts start coming through that people with lived experience are valued and they should be a part of the senior leadership positions. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thanks both so much. That was really inspiring to hear about the journey that Refugee Action has been on, and particularly to hear that you're now 6 out of 11, the majority of the board are experts by experience. And I guess, yeah, to hear the journey that you've both personally gone on along that way. I was really interested to hear about the brave decision that had been taken around strategy and how that was informed by having experts by experience in the room, and also to hear about some of those challenges that had come up and the need to provide support for board members when an organisation is going through difficult times as well. So some really important learning there. We've got a few minutes for questions, and I can see that there's a question from Lisa Ward, which I think you've both touched on a little bit already, but I'm going to invite you to share a little bit more about how do people balance the issue that often happens of having one person with identified lived experience on a board not being representative or it being tokenistic. And it sounded like from what you were saying, like there had been a sort of an early point in Refugee Action's journey where maybe that was an issue and you'd overcome it. So just wondered if you've got some insights to share about that.
Yeah, I think there's a responsibility on the part of the board not to expect that those people to be representative of all refugees and asylum seekers in the same way as you would for any other issue. But it's also, it made a huge difference when there was one EBE. It made some difference. When there were 2 or 3, it made more significant difference. It's much more significant now that they're in the majority. And it feels very natural, as Kathy has said, that the next issue is, yes, but there's an awful lot of power that lies with the chair. So on our power shifting agenda, that's where the ambition comes from, to have the next chair as an EBE. We did have, but at the moment, that is going to be quite challenging. We imagine that person would come in through the organisation, through the board, rather than from outside. But the person who, you're dealing with very vulnerable people, and the person who we identified and was vice chair has had to step away, sadly, because the real pressures of his family and circumstances have meant that he's no longer able to contribute. And I think that's, again, something you've got to take into account. So we were a very happy board of 9 or 10. We're now a board of 11 or 12, because we know that not everybody can show up to every meeting, because if they're solicitor phones, as Kathy's experienced, that obviously has to take priority. You can't mess about with the Home Office in preference to Refugee Action. Wouldn't go down too well. So there's all sorts of ways in which you have to adapt, I think, and your expectations. But I think listening to numerous voices in numerous different ways, which is AFRA's experience as well, is what I would say helps you avoid that kind of pigeonholing or unrealistic expectations of representation.
Thanks. Anything you'd like to add, Kathy?
Well, I think on top of what Penny has said, it's when you're already at the beginning looking for the skills, you need to make sure that you are looking for the right skills and you advertise for the right skills, because many people would apply. But if you make sure that they have the right skills, and also where they do not have the skills, for example, I didn't have the skills to understand finances at all. It's not my area. But Penny has been doing quite a great deal in trying to say, well, do you have any questions, even after the meeting, say anything else that we can do? Would you like to be a part of this? Would you like to be a part of this conference? You know, sharing some information that would help. I think it's something that the organizations should be doing. And also just considering, can we not, you know, just have more people, pull in more people, more resources and different skills to balance the board.
Great, thanks both. So I can see we've just got a question come in from Karen Drury about how do you support experts by experience through the legal responsibilities of being on a charitable board? And I'm not sure, Kathy, if that's something that you experienced when you came in, or Penny, if you've got anything to add on that.
Kathy, do you want to start, or do you want me to?
Yeah, you go on.
So you're a volunteer as a trustee, and you know, you have to be very mindful of people's status. So, for example, some people don't have the right to work, so they can't be paid, but other people can be, and you need to take that into account. But most people can volunteer, whatever your status. But it may be, for example, that you just don't have an access to a laptop, and most, you know, if the meetings are done on Zoom and so on, you're going to have to be willing to provide a laptop. So it does require a conversation and a dialogue. What does this mean for your status? How do we tackle this? We don't get it right all the time. Currently, I've got a letter of complaint from the EB group around some of our aspects of our reimbursement policies, for example. So you just have to keep working at it and keep the channels open on the dialogue to make sure that you're not doing anything illegal, and you're not encouraging that poor volunteer to do anything illegal. But there are ways round, and actually, you know, refugees and asylum seekers are really encouraged to take part in community activities, and often that can count quite positively, is my experience. But Kathy, is that yours?
It is indeed, and I think it's a question that's always asked, particularly when it comes to compensation, to say, should we be compensating? Again, it comes to when we are advertising from the get-go, to just understand and also be very clear to say, this is what we can do, this is what we do as an organization, and have a policy that states it in black and white, and that you're also able to verbally articulate to someone when they are coming to be a part of the board. So like when you know that you're doing it voluntarily, then your expectations are managed from the beginning. For example, if it's about compensation issues. But again, then you need to make sure that, you know, people's transport is covered, you know, the basic, the IT, the accessibility to meetings. Otherwise, why are we doing it if we are not being able to support people to actually be effective in, you know, attending meetings and being there? So basically, it's about that. And remembering as well that everyone's situation is unique. So having conversations with everyone would be important. I mean, sometimes you only have 2-3 people, maybe like us, you have 6, but you can definitely have a conversation to try and understand their unique circumstances, because they vary. So others who can have the right to work, and yet they do not have their right to leave. So having that conversation is very important.
Thanks both. That's really helpful, and particularly an important point to remember, just that everyone's circumstances are unique. And I think reiterating the points that Afra was also making about just really understanding the needs and how to support people. I'm going to leave it there. I can see we've got another question about confidentiality, which I'm going to hold for now, and perhaps we might get time to come back to in the group Q&A later. But thanks so much, Penny and Kathy, for your brilliant contributions. Really appreciated you sharing some of the challenges and how you've overcome that. And I will definitely be watching with interest the ongoing journey with your ambitious aims around the new or the future chair and CEO. So thank you for sharing that as well. Great, but I'm going to move on to our third and final set of speakers, who are here from St Basil's. So I'm delighted to introduce Tamsin Reynolds, who is National Youth Engagement Manager at St Basil's, and Abby Bree and Stephen Chance, who are members of St Basil's Youth Voice Initiative. And Youth Voice is St Basil's collective of youth engagement services that work together to centre the experiences of young people who have experienced homelessness to support and bring about change in the UK. And I'm particularly excited because I understand that we're going to be having a facilitated discussion inspired by the brilliant podcast that I know you guys do. So I'm going to hand over to you to get going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And firstly, Afra, Penny, Kathy, fantastic presentations. So first of all, just a quick introduction. So I'm Tamsin, I'm the National Youth Engagement Manager here at St Basil's. I've 25 years experience working with youth homelessness and 20 years experience of specifically youth engagement. So handing over to Stephen.
Hi everyone, so my name is Stephen Chance. My pronouns are he, him. So I am former vice chair of the Youth Advisory Board after 2 years, and now I am a cooperative board member for St Basil's as of 1 year. 27 years old.
Stephen, you cut out then. I don't know whether anyone else cut out for
sorry.
anyone else.
Sorry, I'm more than happy to repeat. So my name is Stephen Chance. So my pronouns are he, him. I am former vice chair of the Youth Advisory Board after 2 years, and I'm currently a cooperative board member for the main board at St Basil's for 1 year now, and I'm 27 years old.
So I'm Abby, my pronouns are she, her. I'm the former chair of the Youth Advisory Board and I'm one of the current Youth Ambassador volunteers for St Basil's. I came into St Basil's at 17 years old and started engaging with St Basil's properly at 18. So a bit about St Basil's background. So St Basil's is a registered charity and a registered provider of social housing and support, primarily operating in the West Midlands geographical area, specifically Birmingham, Coventry, Sandwell, Solihull, Warwickshire and Worcestershire. Each year, St Basil's work with around 4,000 young people aged between 16 to 25, including children looked after and care leaving young people and young parents or parents-to-be.
St Basil's offers a wide range of services, including but not limited to psychologically informed supported accommodation, general information and advice, and guidance on the welfare and benefit entitlements, health and well-being, and training and education. St Basil's goal is to support young people when in service to develop the skills, competencies, resilience, and confidence to live independently, which includes successfully transitioning from care into adulthood.
Nice then. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about St Basil's engagement? How do young people get involved in St Basil's?
So young people are engaged and involved at all levels within St Basil's. So we have house reps in place in every project, in every accommodation project that we have in St Basil's. We have timed talk sessions, which are creative activity-based meetings to promote discussions with young people using our Let's Engage funds allocated to each service. We have our St Basil's Youth Advisory Board, which both me and Stephen were on, which is made up of young people representing the demographics of St Basil's. We have the St Basil's Youth Standards, which is across the whole of St Basil's, which the agency reviews and monitors at all levels regularly. We have young people trained for the staff recruitment. We have St Basil's Youth Voice podcast, and we have co-opted board members, which Stephen is one of the two.
Right then, so quite often organisations say to us it's really, really difficult to engage young people. So can you tell our audience a little bit about what made you initially want to engage and have your voices heard?
I'll start off then. So for me, I would definitely say it comes from negative experiences that I've had relating to homelessness. So before I came to St Basil's, I experienced homelessness 3 times, and then I managed to get my own place and then had to live with my family. So one of the things that I experienced in another housing organization that I experienced when being homeless, one of the 3 I was working, and because it was in supported accommodation, my rent typically was fluctuating and stuff. So it made it difficult to work and live in supported accommodation. But then also I was kind of constrained in terms of like, because I would work beyond 10 o'clock, so 10, 11, 12, and it's supported, so obviously the accommodation has a duty of care to everybody else that lives there. It kind of made things very difficult for me to get there because the staff would leave at 10, so it would just cause loads of issues and stuff. So bringing those experiences to St. Basil's and voicing those, now St. Basil's actually has a live and work scheme which tailors towards individuals who are in supported accommodation who want to work.
Apologies to interrupt, Stephen. Just to say, you are cutting in and out a little bit. I think we're getting about half of what you're saying, but it'd be great if you could just sort of speak
so
straight
sorry.
ahead. I think no worries. I know
Okay,
it's
I'll get a bit closer.
I think we've got the gist of it, but yeah, please continue. Thank you.
Yeah. So I forgot where I was, but essentially, obviously, transferring those experiences to St. Basil's, where we are now, we've introduced a live and work scheme. So that live and work scheme pretty much tailors towards individuals who are in supported accommodation who want to work. It kind of makes their rent not fluctuate, so they can effectively work, save up, and transition from supported accommodation to whatever accommodation they want to do. So whether that be privately rented or going to further education, that enables them to do that. But obviously that comes from an experience of homelessness and supported accommodation. That would be why.
I'm going to hand that to Abby. You're still cutting out, Stephen. You need to stay really still, really, really still. So Abby, what made you initially want to engage?
So mine is slightly different, and mine was that I didn't have the best of starts to my St. Basil's journey, and I actually had to put in a complaint. But then during that complaint and whilst it was being investigated, I realised that I couldn't actually change what had happened, and that I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't change what had happened with my experience, but I could prevent it happening to other people, and I could change how it could be dealt with in the future and prevent and change, make that change happen. So that's why, I wanted to make that change basically, and that's why I started engaging. And went from there basically.
Nice. So what we're saying, because we work with young people that don't often have their voices heard, we can't straight away get people on a board. So there's got to be lots of different ways that young people can engage, have their voices heard, lots of different stepping stones before they go to the level where Stephen is as a co-opted board member on St. Basil's main board. So my next question would be, what enables you to consistently engage to get to the level, for example, where you are, Abby, and for you, Stephen? So what is it that enables you to consistently feel that your voices are heard and valued within the organisation?
So it all comes down to seeing the change. So seeing the change within St. Basil's, so the implementation of the standards, for example, that we did at the very start of the Youth Voice when I first joined 3-4 years ago. So that's been implemented within the whole of St. Basil's, but not only seeing the change within St. Basil's, but within myself. So I've become a lot more confident. Before I wouldn't even talk in meetings, and now I'm presenting to all of you. So I definitely wouldn't have done that before. So seeing the change within myself as well, but also having that community, and having that family sort of setting that I never really had before. So it's people that I can relate to on some sort of level. We might have all had different we've had some similar experiences, some different, but we can all relate on some sort of level. And we go on little day trips every so often and go on residentials and stuff. So we have fun things to look forward to. We get stuff back. It's just, it's all fun, and seeing the change.
Awesome.
Sorry.
And then Stephen?
So for me, I would definitely say it's the culture in St. Basil's. That's not just between the young people, that's also between staff as well. The relationships that young people have with staff and the staff have with each other, I think that's very important. And then obviously through those relationships, staff can kind of identify the qualities and skills for young people to be in positions such as ourselves, and obviously signpost them to relevant places that can put them in those positions.
Still cutting out, Stephen, I'm afraid.
1 second, sorry. I do apologize, guys. I do apologize. But yeah, I definitely think a lot of it comes down to positive change and promotion of growth and development for young people.
Right, so can we look at now maybe providing organisations that are on the call some top tips to engage in young people specifically? So as I say, lots of organisations sometimes find it really difficult to engage younger people. So what are the top tips that you would advise for that?
I would say simple terminology. A lot of the stuff that we talk about is very high level. So bringing it to a level that is understandable to your service users.
I'd say ask the young people what they want and need from the service.
Listen, be real, honest, and open for dialogue.
I'd say follow through with everything that you say that you're going to do, and feedback updates. Like, even if there's no updates, actually say, unfortunately, there's no updates at the moment, but actually state that and don't just go radio silent.
I would definitely say resources, staffing, and financial incentives. So resources being telephones or laptops in order so young people can actually engage with you. Staffing is important to allow staff to actually support young people in engagement, and financial incentives that kind of value young people for their time for engagement.
Yeah, I'd say quick wins are really important as well. Just so they can see the change and stuff. It can just be something small, but just so they can see that little things are happening, what they're saying is important, and yeah, stuff is happening.
I feel like engagement needs to be backed by senior leadership team, whether that be the board, the directors, and the CEO. It should be considered as a matter of priority. And then if it's considered a matter of priority, then we can use it as a form, well, as a measurement of accountability, which would then in turn be able to allow us to reflect on our practices and our strategic decision making.
Yeah, and I'd say young people can tell when things are done as a tick box exercise. So my final tip would be that when trying to break down barriers and challenges of getting young people involved with policy and decision making, make them the heart and the DNA of everything you do. So every decision, you always have their best interests at heart.
Brilliant. So, and now we'd like the opportunity to invite anybody to ask any specific questions. And I do apologise for Stephen, who has kind of dropped out a few times, but as I say, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, all, and yeah, apologies again about the technical issues, but you were coming through loud and clear towards the end then, Stephen, which is great. And yeah, I mean, thanks so much to all of you for sharing those. Those top tips were really useful. I was scribbling some notes, and I'm sure lots of people were, but I was particularly struck by that need to kind of, feedback the update so people can see the change, and making sure that, yeah, you're providing the resources and financial incentives, as Stephen mentioned, really valuing people for their time and making sure that it's backed by the senior leadership team. I also thought it was really interesting to hear about how young people were engaged and involved at all levels, and there were lots of stepping stones before becoming a co-opted board member. So I think that's really interesting for many organisations that are maybe looking to get started on this journey, and sort of, yeah, have a step-by-step process. So I can't see any immediate questions in the chat, so I'm going to use my speaker's prerogative and just ask one, which I think both Abby and Stephen, you talked about transforming your own negative experience, whether that was of homelessness or of services with St Basil, into these positive outcomes. And Stephen, you talked about, changing the way that rent was set. And I guess that's something that we hear time and again with lived experience. Often people have had difficult experiences. And I was just wondering what supported you to feel safe to share those difficult experiences, or if there's any reflections from Tamsin about how to create safe spaces for people to share or not share as they please, depending on the situation.
I think that for me, so it was actually Taz that was dealing with my complaint. So that's how I met Taz. And obviously Taz is the one that does the youth advisory board. So it was talking to Taz first and getting to know Taz a bit before I joined the youth advisory board. And when I first joined, we didn't have the expectation that you had to start talking straight away. We didn't, you didn't have to get involved straight away. I could kind of just see how it was. There was no expectation that I had to come up with all these amazing ideas, and if I didn't, then I was being kicked off or anything like that. It was also, when going to the meeting, I think I had the expectation that it was going to be like a sit down, really stressful sort of meeting, but we played games, we had fun, and it was very, very youthful, but we also got loads of work done. So I got to know all the other young people. So it was more of an open, fun space where we all, I don't know, it just felt safe. I got, obviously, as I said, I got to know Taz, and Taz had dealt with my complaints, so kind of knew all of my difficult sort of stuff that I was going through anyway. So I don't really know how to explain it. But yeah, I just kind of, is knowing that safe person and having that safe person, getting to know all the other people that you're working with, and then slowly you start to build up the rapport with the people you're working with, and you start to just open up more and more. And that's how my confidence kind of grew. Each meeting I'd interact a bit more and more, and yeah.
I think just to add on to that, what Abby said is that relationship is massive, because kind of, for example, like Stephen now sits on our main board. There has to be that real relationship between young people and staff for them to be able to share that lived experience, just like Abby, but to be able to then have the confidence to sit as young people within within a board of predominantly older people. And for us, it's all about kind of providing a fun and creative and flexing to the needs of the young people. The environment is essential for those young people to feel as safe as possible, to share their lived experience, but then be able to go on to feel that they can influence at a board level and feel confident to do that. So for us, it's all about building relationships between young people, staff, senior managers, chief execs, board of directors, all relationships. And Stephen, just give a thumbs up, but I don't know if you've got something you wanted to add on that. And
oh no, no, sorry. You pretty much covered everything I was going to say. I just got a message from Lily, so I was just putting a thumbs up.
Brilliant. Thanks all. Really, really helpful. And yeah, a great point to end on in terms of that importance of relationships, which I think has come through everything that all of our speakers have said today. I'm now going to invite all the speakers to come. I think we've got about 5 minutes, possibly 10. Let's stretch it to 10 minutes for a bit more of a general Q&A. So we've got some questions that have been asked in the chat previously that we said we would come back to. So I will start with those, but also if anyone else has got any questions that they'd like to ask for our speakers, please do feel free to come in now, and yeah, feel free to either drop them in the chat or raise hand if you'd like to ask something in person. But I did promise that we would come back to this question of how boards deal with confidentiality. So this is a question, I'm interested in how boards deal with confidentiality if clients are on the board but are also involved in services. Has anyone got experience or advice on this? is there any of our panel who would like to answer that one?
So I was kind of writing a response to this, but obviously we started presenting, so I didn't get to finish that response. In my experience, I think it's important that the board kind of identifies individuals who have the ability to be able to articulate at board level.
Sorry, Stephen, you're just beginning to cut out again, which is a shame because you were just getting to a really important point. Do you want to try again? And then if not, we can always come back to you.
Yeah, I think it's important that the board identifies individuals who can actually be comfortable and able to articulate themselves at board level. But then the individual has to be made aware, and it has to be very clear of their obligations and their responsibilities to the board. So in my case, I was a youth advisory board member and a cooperative board member. Those roles kind of conflict with each other, so certain information cannot be divulged from one board to the other. So it's very important that individuals know their responsibilities and their obligations to the board. I think it definitely comes down to the individual.
Great, thanks. And yeah, sorry to kind of cross you. I think we got the gist of that. So really talking about the clarity of roles and responsibilities, and where there is a conflict, just being really clear about those boundaries. But yeah, feel free if there's anything else that you want to add, feel free to put it in the chat, because apologies if we didn't get all of the nuance of that again. But yeah, I'm just going to see what other questions we've got coming through. So we've got another one from Kirsten, who, picking up on a theme that we've explored a little bit with St Basil's just now, so I might invite some of the others to come back in, saying it's quite daunting to be on a board, full stop. How do you make that less scary for experts by experience? And we've heard about some of the great ways that Tamsin and team were supporting people to create safe spaces, but I just wondered if Afra or Penny or Kathy, I think we've lost Kathy's screen, but Kathy, if you're still there, feel free to come in as well. Anything about how to make it less scary for people with lived experience to come on?
I'd be happy to come in on that, Katie. So I think it's about having clear expectations that all the way through, and being clear about what training can be provided, offering buddies. I spend a lot of my time supporting people who are new to the board and saying, don't worry, I was terrified too. I wasn't sure what I was doing. It's okay to take a while to get your feet under the table. I think it's really important to avoid acronyms and make sure that you're talking in a language that's really accessible. But it's also about encouraging people to do their own research. So look at the Charity Commission website, have access to some of the courses and events that the civil society do, so that people can see exactly what their responsibilities are and how other people manage it, and share those kind of tips across people. So I think it's really important to offer people the chance to mentor with other trustees at different organisations, just so that we can kind of build up the strength of people's confidence across the charity sector.
No, totally right, Afra. And the only thing that I could add to that list is just making sure that your own processes are as accessible as possible. So, for example, we have a rule that no paper can be longer than 4 sides and have to be written in simple, accessible English with a summary at the top, and it's clear what you're expecting from the board. You can have as many appendices as you like, but the appendices are optional for everybody. But the actual paper itself, it takes longer for a lot of senior management team to write a short paper, but it's really important that they're as clear and concise and written as simply as possible. And not just leaving people to read stuff, as you say, Afra, because that although the Charity Commission website has all been written in simplified English, which is fantastic, it's really good, but it's just really difficult to read such dense stuff when you don't have the context around you. So the buddying, the one-on-ones, the making it safe to ask questions, the sort of support side is just so important, not just leaving people to read it.
Thanks for that. And I saw there's a comment in the chat, better for all trustees to have short papers. And I think that probably holds true for a lot of the things we've talked about today. So I was struck earlier when we were talking about, there's no silly questions. And I think that's also something that can be quite helpful for all trustees to hear. Certainly in my own trusteeship experience, it's felt great to feel like you are in an environment where you can ask the questions, whether that's in a meeting or asking for a bit of extra support before or after a meeting, to make sure that you understand. And I guess that leads on to a wider question, which is what benefits have you all seen of involving people with lived experience. I mean, you've talked about a range of benefits, but I'm particularly thinking of benefits for trustees who are not necessarily themselves bringing lived experience. What have you seen those trustees learning from having trustees with lived experience on boards?
I think at Rethink, we all learn from each other as trustees, and it's about, I'm sure I see lots of nodding heads, everyone has a different view, and we need those different views to actually make sure we're providing services that support people fully, because everybody has such a wide range of experiences. Some people will have had very fresh experiences that are very raw, and they don't feel comfortable to talk about those yet. So actually having some people who have been through the system before and maybe have left it a little while could be really helpful. But also it's just that idea that the world isn't a simple place where we can put people in boxes. Everything is mixed matched in this world. And I think therefore sharing that trustee experience helps them to understand a lot more. So I know a lot of our co-opted trustees, the ones from industry, really do enjoy visiting services and visiting our support groups because they get to see the difference the charity makes on the ground.
Thanks, Afra. Did anyone else want to come in on that one?
I've learned huge amounts and really reconnected in a different way at a different level with our mission. You know, to have something talked about as if it's theoretical when actually when somebody is in the room who's experienced that, it is entirely different. So my passion for refugee action and the appalling way that refugees and asylum seekers are treated by the government in the UK, you know, I've redoubled my efforts since engaging so much more with EBE. And I think the quality of our decision making, the quality of our strategy, the quality of our bravery actually has been totally enhanced by the skills and the perspectives. It's both the skills and the perspectives of our experts by experience. What about you, Tamsin?
I think for Penny and Afra, you've covered it, but I think for us, you know, our trustees really need to understand what the reality of homelessness is like, and that can only be provided by young co-opted board members that have that lived experience, that, you know, kind of they can really look at the decisions that are made, you know, kind of based on what the reality is for those that have lived experience of homelessness. So it's huge benefits, I think, for both, like you've both said.
Thanks. And Abby or Stephen, I think we've still got Stephen there, just not on video. Would either of you like to add anything from, yeah, I know you were talking about seeing the difference you've made. Is there anything that you've heard from others in terms of how your having you in the room has helped them?
I think pretty much everyone's covered it. But one thing I would kind of like to add to that. So we recently had a board away day, and obviously we're looking at different things, because obviously there's a lot going on. But one of the things I suggested to the organization is using different forms of social media, because obviously we are on Instagram, we are on all of these other things. But that's not necessarily something that St. Basil's has considered before. I don't know if that's something that your organizations have considered, but as you already know, St. Basil's does a great job of youth engagement internally. I was just suggesting that it's something that we should do outside of St. Basil's. So, you know, those kind of perspectives are pretty much very much valued, and it's something that we're looking to pursue. So, yeah, I definitely think having young people or service users on your board to kind of influence different ideas that's relative to what you guys do and your mission, and then obviously, yeah, different perspectives. And yeah, I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, and I think it's just the realities of it and keeping it fresh. Like the world is constantly changing, and it's even like now that I'm an ambassador, so we've got different people on the youth advisory board. So even now, like the people that are living in the supported accommodation now, their experience is different to what mine was 2-3 years ago. So it's like keeping the experience fresh, keeping yeah, it's I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, it's needed. The voices of young people are needed because the world is constantly changing, and every year it's different.
Yeah, and that's such a great note to end on. I think that really came through so strongly from all of your presentations, that as the world changes, as your organization changes, it's not something where you just, say, right, we've got people who've lived experience there, that's job done, but it's very much learning and evolving. And you've all been so generous in sharing your insights and your time with us today about your journeys. I've certainly found it really inspiring as well as practical. I think there's been some really key practical tips that I will certainly take forwards into my own work on many different levels. So really a huge thank you to all of our speakers today. And I can see there's lots of similar comments in the chat of people who've really appreciated what you've been saying. So I think just in terms of a few final housekeeping things, we'll ask people to complete the feedback survey that should pop up on Zoom when this meeting closes. Please do share any feedback that you've got for this event. And for those who'd like to continue the conversation, we've been having such a great conversation this afternoon. We are also running an in-person networking event on the 20th of June, at which we'll be covering topics from throughout our seminar series, including how trustees can centre lived experience. So please do sign up to that. The details are on our website, or they'll, I think, be shared in the follow-up email and the chat as well. And I'd like to end as well with a big thank you again to the Cloth Workers Company for supporting this series of seminars and the networking event that we've got coming up in June. And for those who'd like to carry on the conversation beyond June, many of you will know MPC holds our annual conference, MPC Ignites, in October, and centering lived experience is a topic that we're really passionate about, so we'll be continuing to talk about that. It will certainly feature in our annual conference, so the tickets are available for that if you'd like to sign up and get the early bird deal. So with all that, I think we've just got a couple of minutes left to just, once again end with a massive thank you to all of our speakers and to all of my MPC colleagues who've helped to put this together. Do please share your thoughts, as I mentioned, in the feedback survey when this call ends. We're always looking for ways to learn and improve ourselves. But thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, Katie, and everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.